Hi, welcome everyone to our program. So I'd like to introduce myself first. Tanse, Felicia Gay Sniga, Aswit, Scottish Ego Muskego, and Skill. Nino Waskaiganik. So it's an island on the northern Saskatchewan River on Treaty 5 territory, and it's also the home to a very vibrant Métis community. But today I'm actually a guest on Treaty 4 territory, and very grateful to be here on the Sand, where many nations call home. So I give thanks to my fellow Nehio, Soto, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis people. I'd also like to thank the Mackenzie Art Gallery for making this conversation possible, and as well as to all the artists who have contributed to this exhibition, Touching Earth and Sky. Really, really grateful to all of them. So just a little housekeeping. We're going to reserve at least 15 minutes or so at the end of the conversation. If you want to ask any questions, you can drop them into the chat during the conversation. But we'll keep that all to the end. There's also full bios and the thematic or didactic also will be dropped into the chat as well. But before we start, I'd just like to talk briefly about the story behind Touching Earth and Sky. The original premise, when I first started to talk to artists, was really about interrogating the duality that exists within the concepts of adoption and fostering, and really what those concepts meant to us as Indigenous people before settler colonialism, and how those concepts of adoption and fostering changed drastically after colonialism. But then, the conversations that I had with artists, like the theme started to evolve and change and really became about agency and having, and what agency is to me is like to have the power to walk freely on your own land, and what it means to be an Indigenous person. So that's where the concept of touching earth and sky, it's a reminder that, as we walk through this world, we're touching many spheres. We're touching the earth world, and we're touching the sky world. And that's one of the things that I had wanted to bring out in the show, and just the way it came together. It's just a really powerful narrative, full of story. And so what I've done for this conversation is that I've asked 5 of the 7 artists to come on to ask each other different questions. So I'd like to ask first Shelley Nero to introduce herself, and then she's going to be posing a question to fellow artist Judy Anderson.
Your mic is off, Shelley.
I won't swear this time. I'd like to thank Felicia for inviting me to be a part of the exhibition. And I just wanted to say that it was a highlight of my summer, because, it's nice to know that your work is with other work, and it's almost like they're keeping each other company, even though other people might not be seeing the show. I'm Shelley Nero, and I'm a Bay of Quinte Mohawk from the Six Nations Reserve of the Grand River, and I'm Turtle Clan. The question I want to ask Judy Anderson is, your art practice is vast and varied, and each piece looks like it is done with care and precision. Do you always devote your entire focus into the one piece at a time? I think I'm really looking at the beadwork, because I just think it's amazing that I can't do beadwork like that. I've tried, and if I was to continue to do a piece like that, I don't think I would ever get one done. Yeah, do you always devote your entire focus on the work? And do you take breaks as you develop the work, or as you go along, or do you create these in like a feverish haze? And I think a feverish haze is always a good thing to work in, because, you know, it keeps you going, and it makes you dream, and it makes you think about other things as you're going along. So that's my question to Judy.
Thank you, Shelley. That's a great question. I'll introduce myself and then I'll answer the question. So Judy Anderson Nahiyel from the George Gordon First Nation, Treaty 4 territory, living and working in Treaty 7 territory, which is home to the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda. And the city of Calgary is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Thank you for that question, Shelley. It's funny because we didn't actually get the questions ahead of time. So it's like, oh no, what's she gonna ask, right? So in a way, I've been like trying to prep, but of course you can't without knowing that. But yeah, so I think it's feverish, but I have to admit that for this one, this is the first time I've been able to hire a studio assistant. So I had that studio assistant working on it with me, and they did quite a lot of it. And actually, the whole process started last August, like when the idea came to me, because I knew that I wanted to make this work, and it's about my brother who was a 60 scoop, and it's about my grief over having lost him in my life, right? And so the title is Every Time I Think of You. Every time I think, I don't even know what the title is anymore. Every time I think of him, I cry. Something along those lines. Anyways, so I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get it done within that time because I had decided that this needed to be a large piece, and so beating it was going to take a lot of time. And so normally I work on all of my work on my own because it's usually like I'm honoring somebody in my life. And so and it's always about that relationship between me and that person. And yeah, and so this one I would have really liked to have done it by myself, but then I realized that I needed some help. And what actually wound up happening is that I wound up having help from my entire family at some point in the process. So when I was mocking it up, I was like trying to do the math because I accidentally drew the math funny. And so then my oldest son like helped me do that. And then I wound up hiring my son's girlfriend because she lived in the house and we're on COVID, and she's actually a really hard worker, to help me bead. And so her and I were feverishly beading and in a haze. And when you ask about, just because of the time, no breaks, right? So I think I was working full time for 6 months on it, and like every day I worked on it. And then she did as well. She took more breaks than I did because I can't, you're not allowed to do that to people when you hire them, right? So yeah, so I was working all the time. And then right near the end, we were just pushing really hard. And that's when like my other son and my husband like got involved, and we got it done the night before I was driving it to the gallery, which was the Thursday before the show opened. So yeah, that was that process. So do you want me to just ask Bradley the question now, or?
Well, yeah, I wanted to say thank you for answering that question, because I just want to add in there too that, you know, Judy made this piece specifically for the show. So and it's so situated in the territory. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, Judy. Also, yeah, you may go and ask your question. We'll go to the next image.
Oh yeah, so I'll just add on to what you just said, Felicia, just quickly.
Yeah,
is that
sure.
So I was born in and did a lot of my growing up in Regina, and that's where my brother had been scooped. So it's super fitting that it's showing there, showing in at the Mackenzie in Regina. And so this is what, so the topic is what led me to wanting to ask Bradley a question, because we're dealing with the same topic, but from a different way, because you're a scoop baby. And the thing that kept coming to me was this idea of like the story. Well, actually, first of all, I wanted to thank you for making the piece, because it's very powerful and moving, and I thought very brave of you to create it. And so what I wanted to know is, like, in the way that like so much is coming out right now, and so many stories are being told, and how they're kind of being eaten up by non-Indigenous people and maybe Indigenous people as well, but like how you came to a place where you're able to create this or wanting to create this piece. So, you know, how did you wind up deciding what you were going to share and weren't going to share?
Thank you for the question. My name is Bradley LaRock. I'm situated in Treaty 6 in Saskatoon. My parents are from, my mom is from Fishing Lake in Treaty 4, and my dad is also from Treaty 4 at Standing Buffalo, and I'm Soto and Dakota. Thank you, Felicia, for this exhibition. It's been a long time coming, and I think when we first started talking about this exhibition, I had a completely different idea. You had a completely different vision of what work I would, you know, present, and luckily you were agreeable to or open enough to add this to this exhibition. So thank you for that, and thank you for all the other artists who are also in the exhibition alongside me and everyone else. So the question, thank you for the question, Judy. It's been a long time figuring out how to deal with this particular, my life. My mom, my adoptive mom, who took all the photos mostly in the whole exhibition and created this photo album that you're seeing on screen, saved pretty much everything about my adoption for me. So, and she handed them over to me maybe, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. And they've been sitting in a safe deposit box for that long until maybe about 3 or 4 years ago when I decided that I needed to really figure out how I wanted to present this story, because it's the beginning of everything that I am now. And in trying to figure out to attach the documents to the photographs and the photographs to my memories and to the memory to the broader story, which is, you know, a lot of my friends have really negative stories about being adopted and about being in being a 60 scooper. And so I had to navigate myself around that and through all that, you know, sort of establish my identity on this land and, you know, reestablish my identity within, you know, my own cultures and my own Indigenous bloodline and my ancestors, but also pay homage to and honor, you know, my adoptive parents' ancestors and bloodline, because without them, I wouldn't be here either. You know, I might be in a different space. So it's really about coming to a point where, as an artist, I struggled with, you know, taking the documents that I had, taking the photographs that I had, finding ways to present them, but struggling with the idea of, do I present them creatively or as an artist? Do I put them all in frames and do I, you know, frame them up nice? Or do I just present them as is and sort of let the people sort of see them and sort of make their own judgments or conclusions? And there's one piece, the one that's on the screen now, it's just a blow up of my records from social services while I was in there for the first 3 years of my life, basically. And the records that they took and the reports that they made on me while I was in social services, and also at the beginning of my visits with the family who eventually adopted me. So I think it's really important because my mom, the CFSA 74 little things on there is the Privacy Act. So they have to redact any names and sort of any identifying things. So my mom is in these documents quite a bit, questioning, you know, my state, you know, the clothes that I was wearing and sort of, you know, commenting on how I was and how I acted around them and, you know, questioned like how I got this way. And so I think the best way to present it was just to put it out, see how people react to it and sort of make those connections. so people can make their own connections, I guess. It's kind of really a tribute to my adoptive parents, but it's also all the ties to, you know, my biological parents, and how those two things converged together and eventually just, you know, brought me up to where I am now. So, which is, I think, a pretty good place so far.
Thank you, Bradley. I also really enjoy the piece that's up on the screen now, and the process that you went through to install it, and how it came to be sort of this mapping memory, and how you titled it Mapping Your Heartbreak. And so, you know, for those of you that haven't visited the show in person, the thumbtacks are actually piercing Bradley's heart in each of them, and the tie, the red tie, is actually not severed, it's connected. So it's kind of like this signal that it's not linear, this journey, it's a cycle, and that I thought that was really beautiful. Thank you. So Bradley, you can pose your question.
Okay. I wanted to ask, she's not, I don't see her up here. Anyway, my question is for Julia Rose Sutherland. And I wanted to ask, I really loved a couple of your pieces in your work. The one was the feathers, the photographs of the feathers made out of the cotton candy. But I also love the one table piece that looked like it was melting. It looked like it was melting in place, and it's something I'm very interested in, and maybe you can clarify it. But my ideas around it were the idea of impermanence and deterioration, and things are, you know, slowly transforming, and as we grow, we are also sort of deteriorating to a point where it's kind of we're going towards a much more natural state. And I just wanted to ask the question, what your thought process around that table piece was, and how it looks like it's still melting into a much more natural state.
Thank you, Bradley. That's a really beautiful way of describing the piece. I just want to introduce myself too. I'm Julia Rose Sutherland. I'm Mi'kmaq from the Metapenausian Nation of Red Bank, New Brunswick, but I'm actually a guest on Treaty 7 territory, and I've been here most of my life, which is the ancestral territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Kainai, the Piikani, the Siksika, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and Stoney Nakoda First Nation. The body has actually changed so much from the first iteration of it. So I'm so glad that your interpretation of it was about natural, or bringing it back to something natural. The body is actually, the original state of it was a full cast of my body done in sugar that was cooked to become rock candy. And then the piece is ephemeral in the nature that the sugar wants to absorb as much moisture as it can from the air, and so it starts to deplete and degrade over time. And at first, the sugar was being used in many different ways to talk about trauma and sublimation, to talk about issues within my own family of overeating, diabetes, heart disease, and how these things are linked to health problems and death. And it was also made in tribute to my mother in more personal notes. And then I started working with the cotton candy that you notice, which were made into braids or looked like feathers, to think about the idea of lineage and sweetness, and ancestry beyond something traumatic, but to be something about something sweet, and to be something layered upon. So that's how I'm thinking about the sugar pieces themselves and that degradation. And when you can see the piece in its full entirety before it starts degrading, you see all these beautiful layers of sugar that are slightly different hues and colors, which to me is speaking about ancestry in layers and time. And I was relating it to natural formations of rocks, sedimentary rocks, like the hoodoos in Lethbridge in particular, which is where I would spend a lot of time as a kid looking at. Yeah, so that's how I'm thinking about that piece in general. And of course, I paired it with the neon piece, Flesh Economics, that reads Deeply Love Flesh, and thinking about how lovely the flesh is, but also how, again, ephemeral or fleeting the flesh is, but how important it is to the spirit, whether you're with us physically or not with us, when I'm thinking about lineage as well. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julia. I also like, one of the things I really liked about your work too is that you could enter in and actually make an interpretation. And one of the things I thought about the work was also about the commodification, like how sugar is a commodity, but how also Indigenous women are seen as unmarketed as a commodity, and that it disrupts our agency and our freedom, like to walk this world in safety. And that's what I really, took from that, because I, as a mom, like I've mentioned this like in conversation, I think to Judy and Bradley before about, being a mom myself and having both boys and girls, and like the worry I have over my kids, like, of my daughter walking the streets and feeling she's not safe just because she's, Indigenous, and then even my son feeling like that, and feeling angry that they don't necessarily have the agency they deserve just because they're Indigenous. So like it's like so many ways you can enter in that piece. It's really generative and rich.
Yeah.
Even the way it looks is rich, like aesthetically.
Well, yeah, originally, like, especially,
so thank you.
Yeah,
It was still because, yeah.
Originally,
Oh, go ahead.
Was that it was really about this idea of commodification of the body, especially the Indigenous body, the Indigenous spirit, Indigenous customs. But I'm starting to lean towards this idea of thinking about community engagement more, like community within my family, and the richness in that.
Yeah.
But it's a dead body on a table, essentially, so it's like, especially when you first see it in its entirety, people are usually quite shocked because it's just a replication of my body. And it was made also in part of thinking of my mother, who passed away, at a Calgary detox center. And, she didn't have the support that she needed. And I remember the first time that my grandmother came to see the piece, the first thing she said was, "That's Barbie," as in my mother, Barbara Ann Ward. That's the first thing she said. So, it's supposed to be pretty crass, but I think there's something really beautiful in how it changes over time, especially in this iteration at the Mackenzie, because it's so beautifully melted. It starts losing that crassness and becomes really different, and it becomes, in a lot of ways, a lot more beautiful.
I always thought it was beautiful from the get-go. I didn't get the crassness. Like, I just thought it just made it more animated, the story. So if you'd like to pose thank you again, and you can pose your question next.
Yeah, so my question is for Casey, and I was so excited to ask you a question. I've been following your work for a while. And I'm really curious about metamorphosis within your work, and that relationship between the way that you're using materials such as tree trunks and changing it and metamorphosizing it, and as well as coding, and how you're altering these two things in such an interesting conversation between each other, and thinking about Indigenous futurism, but also about thinking about Indigenous ingrained knowledge.
All right, thank you for the question. My name is Casey Koizan. I'm Tlicho Dene from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, a recent graduate of the Master of Fine Arts program at the University of Manitoba. And actually this work that's in this show, being invited to take part in this show actually fueled the concept for my thesis. So basically my MFA work was made for this show. And thank you for your question, Julia. I'm really just fascinated with the idea of metamorphosis and changing not only the structure the visual elements, but also the ingrained elements of materials, and kind of shifting the perspective so that you can kind of experience it in a different way. Let's say like these pieces specifically, they kind of remove a bit of the earth material element to it, and they bring in this other conceptual element, right? Like this work is, it's called Connected Apart from Each Other. And the way that I interpreted the idea of the theme of the show in regards to adoption is that like my parents divorced when I was really young, and I grew up mostly with my dad away from Yellowknife. So I had to do a lot of my own research in order to acquire all the information about my culture as I could. So in a nutshell, that's kind of like what the work is about and how it communicates. And I really just enjoy the process of working with earth materials and changing them into something different. Also shifting the perspective on how they visually look, right? There's some things within my work that can take a considerable amount of time and energy, but you don't necessarily see that work. For instance, all of the logs are hollow. So a massive amount of time went into hollowing out these logs and changing their kind of like orientation or their internal structure. Like all the internal elements from the logs are housed underneath in order to create that kind of boundary. That sort of like Earth has given themselves up for the sake of the betterment of the world or art or whatever. So it's kind of raising a lot of different questions. But I've always been inspired by like sci-fi and technology and the future ever since I was a little kid. So naturally it makes sense to amend a bunch of technology and a lot of other sort of variations and techniques and mediums throughout the work to bring it all to fruition. Okay, so my question is for Shelley Nero. Shelley, it's an honor to be able to meet with you and talk to you. I had the pleasure of seeing a couple of your works within my MFA advisor's home, Laurie Blondeau. So it was really great to see some of your works in person. And for the Flying Woman series, I find it really fascinating because I also have a very, very deep and invested interest in the dream world and our waking life and how those two can influence each other. My question for your works is mostly about visual composition, really. Within the write-up and doing research about the work, it says it involves like real places and imaginary places. And I'm just wondering how you were able to come up with the visual composition and patterns and line work with each of these pieces. Like, would those dream aspects influence the work, or would the landscapes influence the work as well, or are the dream worlds most of the influence? I'm just wondering if you'd be able to unpack that a little bit.
Hey, Casey. Yeah. Well, this work was made in 1994. Some of you probably weren't even born then. But I did this in a residency at Lightworks in the Syracuse University. And I had a month there. And when I went there, I thought I wanted to go with no real ideas. I didn't want to go there and say, okay, I'm going to make this work and then go home. I wanted to go there and have time to know my materials, know what my limitations were, and just allowed myself to, take those things and just kind of fly with it. They're black and white. I think they're just resin paper photographs. And I started wanting to do a kaleidoscope. So a kaleidoscope is like 8 sections in a photograph, but then the more I started to work with these images, I thought, well, I can't really do a kaleidoscope because it's a lot of cutting and pasting. So I just more or less just went with really simple, the composition of the photographs. And I just, the work started out, we had 4 people in these photographs. I took the photo, I have to go back a couple years. I took photographs at the band center, and I had 4 women in them. And the more I looked at them, I thought, well, they're not really working as a group of 4. And so I just stuck with the one image, and the person in the photograph is Teresa Marshall, who's a Mi'kmaq from Nova Scotia. And I thought what she was doing and what it was sort of, what I wanted it to do, which is freedom and letting this woman sort of fly wherever she wanted to go. And some of them are, there's 2 missing in this series, but in the one at the right hand on the top is probably as close as I can get to a kaleidoscope image. And then it just started to take off from there. The one on the left hand bottom is just an image of a woman sort of floating around. The one on top of her is, it looks like she's like kind of floating down to earth, with her body. The one next to the left hand on the bottom is called Finding Others Like, no, is that what it's called? Yeah, Finding Others Like Herself. And she's in a powwow. And it's also a mirrored image. So if you looked at one side of the photograph, it's sort of the same thing, only thing it's in a mirror image. And let's see, what else can I see here? Beside it is another one, and it's also called Finding Others Like Herself. And here she's at a protest in Ottawa. And the protest that she's attending here is the one that happened in Capitol Hill right after Oka. And on top of her is an image called, I forget what it's called. I think it's Being with Old Ones or something like that. And most of them had just numbers, and some of them do have titles. Even that, I didn't want to impose title. If a title didn't come to me, I just left it as a numbered image. Imagination is really important to me. I try to be as imaginative in the work as I possibly can. Sometimes it doesn't always work, and then sometimes you think, holy smokes, where did that come from? But I think I allow myself to just try to see how far the work will take me, or how far I can take the work. And that's when it becomes really interesting and kind of exciting, just to let your materials do what you want them to do. So that's how this work came about. So I don't know if that answers your question, Casey.
Yeah, absolutely. Masicho.
Thank you, Shelley. So for this part of the conversation, I actually want us to have a conversation, so you guys can take your mics off and don't mute yourself. Don't censor yourself.
Okay.
And so this is like kind of our opportunity just to talk, about, the work itself, and just off the cuff or whatever. And actually, as Casey was talking, I kind of thought of something I never really thought about. And I was thinking about, how trees have that dendrochronology, like it has all those rings that, each year has its own story, but then you pulled it out and transformed it into something else. Did you ever kind of think about that, or did it occur to you, that line of thinking, or am I just...
No, yeah, absolutely. The act of removing all of the innards was, it's an interesting process, because all that's really being left to view is the most recent sort of years from the trees and that sort of thing, right? So it was this interesting kind of like juxtaposition for me, where the work is all about learning about history and culture and all that sort of thing. But my physical act was kind of like removing all of that history and culture from the insides of the trees, but doing it so in a way that people can actually see it like on the ground, like right in front of you, right? And yeah, I'm quite an empathetic person, so I was like, I was feeling for them, you know, like every like earth material or whatever I always work with. I have a lot of empathy for it, because like it was alive at one time, and I really don't even think those materials are dead, even though, you know, they've been removed from the earth or whatever. That's kind of how I view it, as like giving these materials another chance at life, as an artwork, and to kind of like convey certain things to make people feel different things, while the artwork is totally fueled with subjectivity, right? So some people can approach these works, any of our works within the show, and come away with something totally different, something that we didn't even necessarily intend. But it's also something that kind of adds some more light to our works in a different form of understanding.
Felicia, I'm so glad you said that, because in thinking of a question for Casey, I was so enamored with this idea of like the infinite knowledge within a tree that can be encapsulated, and then the correlation to the infinite knowledge that could be encapsulated in code, but that you can't necessarily decode unless you have some sort of key. I thought that was really beautiful. So I love the way you just talked about that, Casey.
I totally forgot to respond to your question about code.
I was just
in my response.
coding.
Yeah, so just to break that down real quick, so the Dene within Northwest Territories abide by what's called Dene laws. They're like loosely fit laws as to how Dene people should sort of like conduct their lives, that sort of thing. So what I did was convert all of these laws to binary code in order to communicate technology's role within my life, within my culture, within my art practice. So that was one thing that just has another sort of like correlation and variable to the work itself.
I also wanted to ask you a question about, I like Felicia's comment about the sort of gutting of that tree and taking all that history and the rings out, and then kind of displaying them on the floor, you know, below the tree. And when I had the opportunity to go and see the whole exhibition in person and real, and my first reaction to your work was I wanted to touch the tree. I wanted to put my arm inside the tree. I wanted to dig my hands into the sawdust. And it was like a real, like a visceral reaction to it, to a point where what Felicia said about taking that history and what you said about taking that history out is that you're almost transforming that thing into something that isn't just visual, it's also very tactile, and you're taking the you know, all that history of that tree and you're putting it into a form where, you know, you can feel it, you can dig your hands into it, and you can, you know, throw it all over the place if you want and rub your face in it or roll in it or whatever, and you have that much more physical connection to it. And so that was my first feeling when I saw the work. I walked around that piece for, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 minutes and just kind of looked at it and looked at the code and looked at the piles, and ultimately I didn't, but I wanted to put my arm up one of those trees and sort of feel the inside of the tree and see how that felt, you know, and see, and then stick my hand into the sawdust and see how that felt and see. So it was very intriguing.
Yeah, it's been important for me for quite a few years now to try and trigger as many of the bodily senses as possible. So sight, sound, smell, touch to an extent, you know, and then the ethereal sort of like energy aspect of everything. So that alone, Bradley, gave me a ton of ideas for future artworks, man. So thank you very much.
I mean, all the works are really process driven too. And it's like, we don't talk enough about, you know, what the process is before these works are made. And it's like almost, well, it is just as important as the actual visual piece that we're presenting to the public. And it's like, I think Indigenous people were so story and narrative driven. And it's like, people miss that whole, you know, thing because they don't know what's going into. But the thing I like is that how we believe like things are animate, you know, these things are animate and alive and they carry on. And Judy, one thing I was super curious about, and I never asked you because I was kind of like tentative about asking you, is could you talk about the porcupine quills and what they mean? If it's
Oh,
okay. If it's okay, I mean.
yeah. So the reason that I put the porcupine quills at the bottom was that, as we know that while beads have become, we've taken them on as a traditional thing, that they're actually a trade item that then we brought in, right? And that quills would have been the first thing that we would have used. And this whole idea of adoption or taking kids away is not within was also not what we would do, right? I mean, family would step up and take care of kids. And so I was thinking about how those beads are replacing the quills and how those family structures have been broken down. And so the quills at the bottom are like that, that loss of that traditional making, along with the kids being scooped from homes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love like how you mentioned like the fringes are like tears. Like it's so emotive. Like a lot of people I know are really responding to that work. It's really
Thank you.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Could we see that work?
Say that again.
Could we see it again?
I think it's the slide person. So this behind me is actually a close-up of the work. So the top portion is weaved and then the bottom portion is like fringed, hanging beads. And so the entire thing really is my tears.
So Shelly, you can kind of see like there's like a wave kind of towards the top. All that's fully beaded. And then all of that is fringe. And it's all Mayuki bead, right? It's two types of beads.
Yeah, so they're size 8 Miyuki beads, and so they're clear, and then where the letters are, they're clear, but they're with an opal sheen on them.
Yeah, it's very subtle, actually.
It's amazing.
And the work is big. Like what are the dimensions of that?
So 6.5 feet by 9 feet.
Right.
So 9 feet long and 6.5 feet tall, which is why I needed all the help from my family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, I can't even believe that. I just started trying to bead. My sister and my grandmother bead, and I've never been attuned to it. But I started doing it. I was very inspired by your work, and I was like, oh, I want to feel that tactile. You know, there's something so tactile about beadwork, and size 8. I can't imagine that you were doing it. That's crazy to me, because I was doing like size 11, and I'm struggling. You know.
So size 11 is smaller than a size 8.
Okay. So I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all right. Size 11 is like, so usually when I'm teaching people how to bead, I'll use a size 10. And then when I was doing this piece, I knew I had to go bigger than a size 10. So I went up to an 8.
Funny. I just love it so much. It's so ghostly. I haven't got to see any of the work in person yet, but this piece in particular is so ghostly, and just again the tactility, like of feeling, of wanting to feel that, and like wanting to touch that membrane, which I imagine is so similar to the need or want to touch your brother or to be in physical presence. And I think that is so, it's so there with the work. It's just amazing. I just love it so much.
How did you do that, Judy? Did you put it like on the wall as you're working, like a loom, or?
No, so it's a square stitch. So it is like loom work, except for you do it in the air. And so so then we just did it on our laps. So it was just like slowly getting folded and folded as we made it. And then we attached it to so went through a process to attach it to the pole that it's on right now. Yeah. So it was all I do these things where I make them very big, and I've never done it before. And I go, okay, I think I should do 6 feet by 9 feet, something I've never done before, because that'll work, but it worked. So I'm pretty happy about that. But Julia Rose, that whole idea of tactility, the same thing goes with your piece, right? Because you want to touch it, right? And as you see it dripping on the table like that, you know, and it's changing every day, right? And so it's almost like those thoughts and emotions and ideas around what your piece is about is like moving, you know, like it's moving and as the way our thoughts do around, you know, the especially the topics that you're addressing.
Yeah, I always think of the sugar as a living material. Like this is alive. Like Felicia mentioned, this idea of giving all of these items, all of this work, this idea of like anonymacy or living state. But that's how I've always thought about the sugar. It's an organism and it's living and it's doing whatever it wants to, and I can only try to how to help it exist in some form, but it's doing what it wants.
Yeah.
It's cool too, like to think about, you know, how story is also like a science. It's a way we research and transmit knowledge. And when we look at, you know, art like this, it's still traditional in the senses that we're transmitting knowledge and stories, and that's important. Like, and I don't think people talk enough about that, because like for me, like I've been looking a lot at Swampy Cree stories, like from my mom, and she's decided just, you know, past maybe 4 years, like to share stories with me, and it's given me such a like I never questioned who I was as a Swampy Cree person, even though I'm mixed, because I'm so connected to my community. But I never felt more connected when I started to kind of look at the world through these stories my mom was telling me. How important, like, is our stories? What do you feel like? I don't even know what I'm asking you guys, but but I'm excited about this revelation in my own life and how it kind of connects to curation, because I feel like maybe I'm a storyteller, and you guys are all storytellers, and this is totally, you know, something we've always been doing, and it's kind of exciting to me to look at it that way, you know. I don't know.
Well, I was just thinking a little while ago, or like just minutes ago, I guess. I was thinking about how to pass, like this exhibition is really asking a question about, you know, how do I pass the legacy of this story on to my kids, right? So how do I pass, you know, my Indigenous, you know, ancestry and my non-Indigenous sort of ancestry, because they play such important roles to get me to where I am. So my adoptive family, you know, it's generations of their family to make a decision to adopt me in the first place and to be good people, essentially. And then they're just as important as, you know, my biological family to have, you know, survived all the shit that we've taken over the past few hundred years, and get me still to this point where I'm able to speak about it today. So my question to myself is, how do I pass both of these legacies on to my kids so that they can carry these stories forward as well? And that's kind of putting it out there into the public too, because, you know, maybe I'll have get better ideas of how to present that story, and maybe how to take that story home and be able to tell my kids about it. So.
Mm-hmm. They're so anchoring, these stories, you know, even though it's difficult knowledge, but they're so, like, you know, it takes such a strength to relay them, you know. I'd like to, like, if it's okay with everyone, if we could open up, you know, this next part to questions from the public, if there's any. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to wait. Okay, there's nobody's posing. They're scared of us. I guess we can keep talking. So
what I really like about Judy's work is the precision, like how I looked at your piece and I kind of stood in front of it for a few minutes, and I noticed how level the top line was of your beading, and how precise the letters were, and how even precise the wave that goes through Eugene is. Like there's I mean, like I know you've never done it before, but that's pretty good. Like it's so nice, and square and level, and everything is so precise. How long did that take to make the whole thing?
So we started beading probably in halfway through January, so the middle of January till when did the show open? On the 12th. So
Mhm.
finished and on the floor to roll up on the 8th, I think, of June. So, but again, I do have to impress that I had a lot of help. Like this definitely was not done on my own. And like
Right.
huge shout out to everybody who was working those long days with me, you know, to get it done. So, just in terms of that preciseness, the square stitch does that. And then also the Miyuki beads, they're more consistent in size. So they're Miyuki seed beads. Yeah, so where the check ones, like there's a lot of size differences, so that made it a little easier. It would have been best to use the ones that are exactly the same size, but that would have been very, very, very expensive. So this was kind of what I settled on. Yeah.
Okay, we have some questions. So I think this is to everyone. From Sherry Frellerset. How did you look after yourself while you worked with these hard stories? Did you look after yourself working through these hard stories? It's coming back to that whole concept of care, right? Like, how do you care for yourself and others when working through this type of difficult knowledge? Bradley, did you have did you have to do anything just to feel like safe and, because this was such a difficult process for you?
I think, yeah, I had to grow up a lot. I had to kind of get over myself and accept that most of my life, because of where I experienced in foster care, this is what I hypothesize anyway, is that in foster care, because I was in 3 years of foster care, going 3 different foster families, and then one failed adoption, and then one sort of adoption that took, I guess. I had a hard time, like loving people or showing love or letting people love me, and not being protective of myself. So it's taken me, my whole life, basically. I'm 56 now, still learning how to do that. And so I think that this process, my self-care, was just learning a lot about how to deal with things on an emotional level and not so much on a intellectual or a, a level that removed it from myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell the story about people who have seen my photo album. For years, I looked at my photo album and I just saw the photographs and I thought, oh, good memories and stuff. But then there are a couple of people in my life who looked at the photo albums and saw completely different things. I saw sort of this lost kid, saw somebody who, didn't know how to react to the things that were happening around him in those photographs. And so that really got me thinking about, I have to approach this from a much more emotional standpoint and quit looking at it from an intellectual or a once removed sort of viewpoint. And that's come over years and years of just slowly being okay with myself and not second guessing things and developing the courage to let myself love people in a way that it's nourishing and healthy, and let them love me, which was the biggest part. So that's kind of
Such a journey. Yeah, it's such a journey. I know, like, I feel so much empathy for artists that, even with performance art, I remember I took a performance art class with Lori one year, and I did a performance about suicide, and I felt so assaulted by the audience and their questions that I thought, man, I would never be a performance artist, or, I just couldn't do it. It's just so, you open yourself up so much, and it gives me a concern. Shelley, I was thinking about you too, like, because, you know, you're one of the first artists I came across when, you know, I started down the road of through art history and learning about art history. And, you know, I consider you one of our matriarchs in contemporary art. And because you've been involved with like institutions for such a long time, like showing your work, and are there ways like that have changed over the years how you care for yourself, like having to deal with I don't know, like like whether it's institutional racism or people, you know, or are they just scared of you and they don't do anything to it? But do you have any advice, like, or things that worked for you to care for yourself?
Yeah, working with institutions can be kind of rough sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
And you don't know the journey that those people have gone through in their own lives. I just like to like to be consistent, and when I'm working, like coming into a gallery or an institution or a museum, and it's like, this is my space where I can bring my work in, I can hang it up, and people, you know, I want people to respond to it. And if they do respond to it, I'm really happy about that. And I think that I try not to let the institute sort of, you know, roll over me, because they can try, but once the work's up, you know, it's like, hasta la vista, baby.
Yeah, yeah.
I just
I
think
like,
you have to just love your work, you know, and love hanging it up, and you know, don't let the jokers get to you.
yeah.
Yeah.
I like what Faye Heavyshield once told me was that, you know, my work in the gallery, that becomes my territory, and you don't mess with my territory. And I love that she said that, because it's so
Nice.
true.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, we don't have museums of our own or galleries. If we do, they're very limited. So I just think that, you know, by us hanging up our work, we're really opening up doors for the ones who are coming behind us. That's what I like to think about anyways.
Yeah. Oh, we have another question. So someone was asking me to explain the title of the exhibition a bit. I kind of did. So I'm really interested in locating myself within, well, I'll call it a thematic. So like when thinking through an idea that I'd like to talk about through visual art or whatever, I really have to locate myself within the narrative first. So I was really talking about, again, that agency. So the title itself is actually like this kind of covert reminder to other Indigenous people that we have power and agency on our territories. So when you're touching different spheres, it's a reminder that you have agency in lots of different places and different areas, and you have that power, and to not question it. So that's kind of where it came from. Looks like we have another question for Bradley from John Hampton. Brad, can you talk about the leader post piece as material? Include that reference in this place, really create a powerful connection that feels so personal as well as expansive.
The leader post, I've looked at that for years and years and years, and kind of have always smiled about it, because my mom had written in the bottom something like, this picture came out in the leader post, and I went and got him, kind of thing. And
in the backstory, because maybe some people don't know that this even happened.
Yeah, in that little display, there's an AIM pamphlet, and AIM is Adopting the Métis program that Saskatchewan had developed in the late 60s. and it ran for a couple of years, I think. And what they used to do is post photographs of Indigenous kids who wanted to be, or who they were trying to set up for adoption. So every week or every day or something, there'd be a different Indigenous kid. And so my photograph was in the leader post. I don't know when it got into the leader post.
Other image.
Yeah, but my name was Tony in there, and they hid your identity, but they showed your photograph. So my name was Tony in there, even though my name was Scott, and eventually my name turned to Brad after I was adopted. So she clipped that out and saved it for me, and then put it in my photo album. And she, as she did with all kinds of other little milestones and stuff. So yeah, that photograph is incredible because it's an original clipping from a newspaper that my mom saw. So pretty important.
A lot of people also commented on the AIM pamphlet because of the connection to what it meant here in Saskatchewan, but also the American Indian Movement
Right.
Acronym. So I think we are actually over time. This went by so quick, everyone. I was so nervous about it, but I really like the question format. I think it was really generative. Hey,
That's good.
did it make you nervous trying to come up with questions? It's like a mean teacher. You have your question. But I think like I'm so happy this came together, and that I just feel really humble and grateful that the work that you all contributed, and I just can't thank you guys enough for being part of this and being so generous with me. Yeah. Does there anyone want to say anything in closing before we sign off?
Just thank you, Felicia, and to the Mackenzie Gallery for staging this exhibition. It's beautiful, and I really appreciate being shown with all these artists and being able to tell a story.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Felicia.
Sure, Felicia.
All of you, yeah.
Bye.
Thanks everyone for joining us as well.